The desert did not care who screamed in it. The sun rose the same way it always had, spilling fire over the red rocks and dry earth, watching without judgment as 5 Apache women were dragged to the cottonwood trees at the edge of the canyon. Their wrists were bound, their braids tangled with dust, their eyes burning not with fear alone but with a quiet fury that came from knowing. The truth would die with them if no one intervened. They were not criminals. They were not thieves. They were witnesses. Days earlier, they had seen something no one wanted spoken. A deal between corrupt traders and a renegade militia that profited from stolen land and dead natives. To silence them, a lie was spread through the frontier town like poison. The Apache women were spies, dangerous, disposable. The men who tied the ropes did not look at their faces for long. Cowards never do. As the knots were secured and the women were hoisted upside down, blood rushing to their heads, the desert wind carried their labored breaths across the ravine. Each heartbeat felt louder than a gunshot. Somewhere far away, a rancher named Caleb Harlan rode hard, unaware that fate was pulling him toward a choice that would define his soul. Caleb was not a hero by reputation. He was a man haunted by past inaction. By the day, he had watched injustice and ridden away. As he crested the ridge and saw the figures hanging beneath the trees, his horse reared, sensing the wrongness in the air. Caleb dismounted, binoculars shaking in his hands. And when he saw they were women, still alive, something inside him broke open. He could ride away again. No one would blame him. The law in that territory bent toward whoever paid it. But the women's eyes met his across the distance, and in them he saw not a plea, but a command, do what is right. Caleb loaded his rifle, checked his revolver, and stepped into the open, knowing that once he acted, there would be no turning back. If you believe stories where one choice can change everything, this is your moment. Subscribe now, because this is only the beginning. The men guarding the trees laughed when they saw Caleb approach alone, dust on his coat, sun at his back. They did not recognize him, and that was their first mistake. Caleb spoke calmly, his voice carrying across the sand, telling them to cut the women down, telling them the lie would not hold. Laughter answered him, until the first shot rang out, shattering the rope of the nearest woman, her body falling into the sand where Caleb caught her before her strength failed. Chaos erupted. The guards scattered, some firing wildly, others fleeing when they realized this rancher did not miss. Caleb moved with the certainty of a man who had already made peace with the consequences. One by one the ropes were cut. The women lowered, breath returning, life reclaimed from the edge. When the dust settled, the silence felt heavier than gunfire. The women stood together, unbroken, dignity intact, their survival now a challenge to the lie meant to erase them. Caleb did not ask for thanks. He offered water, his coat, and a promise to escort them to safety, and more than that, to expose the truth they carried. In the weeks that followed, the frontier would change. Names would be spoken aloud. Corruption would burn under the light. And 5 Apache women, once meant to vanish without a sound, would become the reason an entire territory questioned its own cruelty. Caleb would be remembered not as a gunslinger, but as the man who finally chose to stand when it mattered most. Stories like this are not just about the past. They're about courage, accountability, and the price of silence. If you want more powerful Wild West stories where justice fights back, subscribe to the channel because the next story may challenge everything you think you know about heroes. By the time the sun dipped low and painted the desert in copper and blood-orange light, the world around Caleb Harlan and the 5 Apache women had changed forever, though none of them yet understood how far the consequences would reach. Because survival is only the first step in a longer war against lies. And as they rode away from the cottonwood trees toward the broken hills, the silence between them was thick with unspoken memories, with the knowledge that men who attempt to erase truth do not stop, simply because they failed once. The women rode upright despite their exhaustion, their strength no longer something hidden or symbolic, but proven, each mile placing distance between them and death, while drawing them closer to something more dangerous. The exposure of powerful men who thrived on secrecy. And as Caleb listened to their story in fragments carried by the wind, he realized this was never about 5 lives alone, but about land, stolen supplies, forged treaties, and an entire frontier built on the quiet disappearance of those who saw too much. And the women spoke not with bitterness, but clarity, naming names, places, nights when wagons moved without records, and men wore badges they had bought instead of earned. And Caleb felt the weight of every word settle on his shoulders because he knew what happened to men who carried truth into towns that survived on convenient lies. Yet he did not slow his horse, because once a man chooses a side, hesitation becomes betrayal. The town they reached before dawn was smaller than the one they'd fled, a place where the buildings leaned like tired men, and the sheriff slept more than he worked. But even there, whispers spread faster than fire, and eyes followed them with suspicion and curiosity as the Apache women dismounted in the open, refusing to hide, refusing to shrink. And Caleb announced loudly that anyone who wanted to hear the truth could gather at the trading post by noon, a bold move that felt reckless even to him. Yet courage is often mistaken for madness by those who never risk anything. And as the hours passed, men arrived, then women, then those who pretended not to care but stood close enough to listen. And when the Apache women spoke, the air itself seemed to still, because truth spoken calmly is more dangerous than shouted anger. And they told of seeing the secret exchange, of recognizing men who later accused them, of understanding that their deaths were meant to protect a profitable lie. And some listeners scoffed, some shifted uncomfortably, but others, enough, recognized the cracks in the story they had been fed. And when a man stepped forward to call them liars, Caleb asked him a single question about a shipment date that only someone involved would know, and the man's silence echoed louder than any confession. And that was the moment the balance tipped, not toward justice yet, but away from blind obedience. And in the days that followed, riders carried word beyond the town, into places where officials could not ignore it without exposing themselves. And though threats came and warnings, and offers of money to make the problem disappear, Caleb refused them all, because the past had already shown him the cost of silence. And the Apache women remained visible, present, living proof that the frontier's favorite solution, erasure, had failed. And when eventually arrests were made, not enough to cleanse the land, but enough to crack the foundation of corruption. It was not victory that filled the air, but something quieter and more lasting, accountability. And as the women prepared to return to their people, they did not thank Caleb as a savior, but as a man who chose to stand, reminding him that courage is not owned by one race, one badge, or one legend. And as they rode away beneath a sky opening wide and endless, Caleb understood that some stories are not meant to end cleanly, because justice is not a moment, but a direction. And the Wild West was shaped not only by guns and gold, but by rare moments when ordinary people refused to look away. If this story moved you, challenged you, or reminded you that one decision can change many lives, subscribe to the channel, because more powerful Wild West stories are coming, stories they tried to bury, but never could.